There's a comparison being made in Washington right now that is driving the Trump White House absolutely mad, and it matters enough to spend a moment on. Trump, throughout this conflict and before it, made one thing very clear. Whatever deal he reached with Iran would be far better than the JCPOA, the multilateral nuclear agreement negotiated under Barack Obama, signed in 2015 and abandoned by Trump in 2018 during his first term. Much better than Obama, he said. Much better. Now, with the MOU signed and the details absent, critics in both parties are asking, is it? Here's what the 2015 deal actually achieved. Iran agreed to cap uranium enrichment levels and significantly reduce its enriched uranium stockpile, limit the number of centrifuges it could operate, accept regular international inspections of its nuclear facilities, all in exchange for sanctions relief. It was multilateral, signed by the US, UK, France, Germany, Russia, and China, which gave it a degree of international legitimacy and enforcement architecture that a bilateral US-Iran deal cannot easily replicate. Here's what we know about this MOU. Iran has committed conceptually to not developing a nuclear weapon. The specifics of enrichment levels, stockpile disposal, centrifuge limits, and inspection mechanisms, everything that gave the 2015 deal its teeth, have not yet been publicly detailed. The 2015 deal also was negotiated over nearly 2 years, with a dedicated diplomatic team, extensive technical expertise on nuclear issues. This MOU was reached in the wake of a shooting war, under enormous time pressure, with a 60-day window for the hard parts that even experienced diplomats say isn't nearly long enough. One senior diplomatic correspondent put the underlying tension plainly. The comparison to 2015 really stings Trump because it exposes the gap between the scope of what he promised and the reality of what's been achieved so far. Critics from both parties are asking a harder version of the same question. What was this war actually for? Billions of dollars in munitions expended. The Iranian regime, by most accounts, stronger than before the war began. The nuclear issue still unresolved. The Strait, which was open before the war, now being celebrated for maybe reopening. A new supreme leader with no established anti-nuclear fatwa. Let's end the analysis section with what might be the most grounding piece of context in this entire story: what 60 days actually means. Every experienced Iran negotiator, everyone who has sat across a table from Iranian diplomats, who understands the pace of Iranian decision-making, the role of the supreme leader, the dynamic between the foreign ministry and the Revolutionary Guards, every one of them is saying the same thing. That's not enough time. Not close to enough. Not even in the right order of magnitude. Think about what needs to be resolved in that window. The precise terms of uranium enrichment. What levels, what stockpiles, what disposal mechanism. The inspection and verification regime. Who can go where, how often, under what notice. Sanctions relief. What lifts when, in what sequence, tied to what benchmarks. Iran's frozen oil revenues. How much, when, conditional on what? The Strait of Hormuz. Permanent governance. The toll fee question, the sovereignty dispute that goes to the heart of international maritime law. Lebanon, whether Israeli forces stay or leave, what Hezbollah's status is, what security guarantees look like, Iran's missile program, whether it's on the table at all, under what framework, and proxy networks, Hezbollah, Houthis, Iraqi militias, what cessation of support means in practice, how it's verified. Each one of those issues in isolation could take months of dedicated technical negotiation. Together, they're the most complex diplomatic package in the modern Middle East. Now add a new, untested supreme leader in Tehran, whose religious rulings are not yet consolidated, a divided Iranian political establishment, with hardliners actively trying to sabotage the process, an Israeli government that wasn't at the table and may actively undermine the Lebanon provisions, a U.S. president who has shown a tendency to announce deals before they're finalized, change negotiating positions mid-process, and move on when his attention shifts. Day 108, a document signed electronically from 3 different cities by people who have spent 4 months calling each other enemies, ships, some of them, beginning to move through water that has been, effectively, a no-go zone since this war began. Oil prices falling, markets exhaling, families in Tehran daring to wonder if the prices that have doubled and tripled might slowly come down. Sailors on 800 stranded vessels staring at their phones for updates. And in Jerusalem, a prime minister preparing to address a nation that feels, in the words of its own political class, left behind by the country that has been its closest ally for 3/4 of a century. This is what Day 108 looks like. Not a triumph, not a defeat, something more complicated and more human than either. A pause, fragile, contested, celebrated by everyone and trusted by almost no one. Here's what I want to leave you with. The world has watched 4 months of a conflict that, as the BBC's chief international correspondent said, has left hardly a country untouched from one part of the globe to the next. We've seen oil spike to $114 a barrel and fall to 3-month lows in the same week. We've seen an Apache helicopter downed by a $50,000 drone. We've seen an AI boat rescue 2 pilots from a sea that had just been mined. We've seen 3 Indian sailors die on a tanker that had nothing to do with the war. We've seen 1,000 settler attacks in the West Bank. We've seen a new supreme leader take power in Iran after his father was killed on the first day of someone else's war. And now we've seen an MOU signed by people who can't agree on what it says. The 60-day clock starts now. And the questions that will define the next chapter are not diplomatic abstractions. They are the most concrete imaginable. Will the mines come out of the strait in time for safe passage? Will Iran's new supreme leader bless the nuclear provisions? Provisions that require him to accept constraints his father's fatwa once imposed, but now need new legal and theological foundations? Will Netanyahu survive politically long enough to engage meaningfully in a process his government views as a betrayal? Will Trump's attention remain focused on the Iran file long enough to see the hard parts through? And underneath all of that, the question that may, in the long run, matter most of all, has this war actually made the world safer? Has it moved the dial on Iran's nuclear ambitions in a durable way? Or has it, as the critics increasingly argue, spent billions, burned through relationships, empowered hardliners on every side, and ultimately arrived at a framework that is, at best, no better than what patient diplomacy might have achieved without a single shot fired? If this series has helped you understand one of the most consequential conflicts of our time, subscribe, share it with someone who needs the context, and let us know in the comments, what do you think the 60 days will actually produce? Day 109 tomorrow. See you then.